Well, welcome everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here today. My name is Mary Beth Gassman, and I'm a professor at Rutgers University. I also have the honor of being the executive director of the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions and the Proctor Institute for Leadership, Equity, and Justice. And we are really thrilled to co-sponsor this event today with the Institute for the Recruitment of Teachers, IRT. The event is called Becoming an Educator, a conversation with the Institute for Recruitment of Teachers. We have some amazing people here today, and I am going to hand over the moderator duties to Catherine Wong, who is Associate Director and Manager of Programs for IRT, and she will introduce our panelists and talk more about what's going to happen today. So welcome, and I hope you really enjoy the webinar. Catherine, take it away.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. In Hawaii, where I was raised and from, we say aloha kako. So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm thrilled to welcome our panelists. I offer our appreciation to Rutgers for hosting us and partnering with us for this info session. A little bit about me, as I just mentioned, I'm from the island of Hawaii. And I come to this work wanting to innovate, inspire, and initiate. The idea is that it's important that our young people, regardless of whether they're K-12 or all the way through graduate school, have instructors, administrators, faculty that really mirror their lived experiences. And so that is what IRT is about. It's building supportive communities so that going through grad school and starting a career and going through a career in education, that you are uplifted and supported instead of being dismissed and dissuaded. So today you're going to hear from some incredible IRT alumnus, as well as hear an overview of our program. I'd like to take a moment and have each of our panelists come on screen and offer their greetings and a little bit about themselves. So Marcus, why don't you go first?
Hello, everyone. Excuse me. My name is Marcus Penny. I am an instructional coach, a STEM instructional coach with Boston Public Schools. And I am honored to be here today to share a little bit on my experiences, my interests, which actually include really looking at STEM identity and identity overall, which includes digital identity and the ways in which AI has both shaped our identity and the way in which we shape AI's identity and that affects on education. So glad to be here, excited to be here.
India?
Thanks. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is India Hayes. I am currently a PhD candidate in sociology here at Rutgers. And I'm also a Thurgood Marshall Dissertation Fellow with the Department of African American Studies at Dartmouth College. I'm excited to be here. IRT has been incredibly vital to getting me here to Rutgers, and I'm excited to talk more about what it's done for me and the research that I do now. Thanks.
Mayra?
Hola, buenos días, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Mayra. I'm originally from Nicaragua, raised in California, and made a whole life and career out of Washington, D.C. And I am a former dual language teacher, dual language instructional coach, dual language assistant principal, and I served as the principal of the second oldest dual language school in the country for 7 years in Washington, D.C. I care really deeply about linguistic liberty and liberation for our students, and in turn, the adults that also benefit from that when they work with them. Care really deeply about dual language and specifically the representation of the Latino principle. Great to be here.
Sol?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sol, and right now I'm a PhD student in curriculum, instruction, and teacher education at Michigan State. Before that, I was a high school teacher in Somerville, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. I taught high school history to newcomer and immigrant youth. And in my PhD, I decided to go for it because I wanted to know a lot more about the lives and ideas and dreams of my immigrant students. And so now I'm looking at a dissertation project that really centers on storytelling, immigrant youth stories, and the different types of work that stories do that go beyond just representation and information giving.
Thank you. Lashonda, do you want to pop on and say hello?
Hi, everyone. My name is LaShonda Brooks, and I'm currently the Executive Director for the Institute for Recruitment of Teachers. My interest is primarily around education policy, access, school district resegregation, but more importantly than that, I like to use my background in program development to really think about how we can augment opportunities in education for some of our most vulnerable student populations. And so I'm here and incredibly excited to see so many folks in the IRT community who have come through in different ways to help us out. I'll be here to talk about the experiences that they've had and hopefully really spread more information about how we can have more educators across the United States and also worldwide that are really interested in these causes and issues because it's such an important time right now. So thank you all for being here. And thank you to the IRT community for continuously showing up even in some of the more difficult times.
Thank you, Lashonda. So we can start the PowerPoint. So what we want to do is the panelists will come on but in a bit, but what we wanted to do was to give you some general information and overview about IRT. What you see here is if you scan the QR code, you'll see this is to our IRT brochure, which will give you information that we're covering today, as well as a link to our website and our application as an IRT scholar has opened December 1st, and the app is due on the beginning of March. Next slide, please. So what we're going to cover is giving you a bit more information about what IRT is, outlining the goals and components, the timeline, our eligibility, and the programs that we support. We'll also be able to give you a bit more information about the schools that are part of our consortium, as well as application materials. And again, we'll follow up with an alumni panel so you can hear directly from the IRT scholars themselves. Next slide, please. So what is IRT? It is a graduate preparation program. It's a free pipeline program that provides a 12-month process where you receive individual advising throughout the graduate application process. It's master's through PhD, and our educators include K-12 all the way through to the professoriate. So as you can see that it is, we truly believe that our educator workforce needs to be more diverse, and diverse in a way that is also where you feel supported and part of a community and not feeling isolate. Next slide, please. So the goals of IRT is based on a mission that IRT itself was established in 1990. I became involved in 2007 as a higher ed partner, so it feels very full circle that I have come to IRT now as staff. But through the years, I've learned so much about IRT, and not only does it address the lack of teacher diversity at all levels, but it really provides scholars with culturally responsive curricula and critical pedagogies that reflect their lived experiences. I'm really excited that Maida, Marcus, and Sol are actually graduates of the Urban Teaching Scholars program that I ran at Boston College. And so they came from IRT, they came in with the leadership skills, they came in understanding cultural responsive pedagogy in a way that they then became leaders of the cohort at their institutions. And then, as you can see, went on to these thriving careers. So that we look at training educators as researchers, administrators, what we realize is that we need to be not just at the table, we need to be creating tables, again, across the educational landscape. Next slide. And so we wanted to have you take a quick look at our most recent cohort who's with us right now and that or just graduated. And so You can see that we processed over 755 applications. They filled out to graduate school. 77% of them were admitted to graduate school. What you can see is that we run a cohort of a little over 100 students a year. And they are identified as different genders. We have a total different applications, as well as, again, who enrolled in both PhD as well as in different institutions. We also have grown to the fact where our students are majority first generation and identify as low income. Next slide. So the program components is you receive an IRT advisor as well as a statement of purpose advisor who is a different person. And you also receive fee waivers from our consortium institutions. And so your IRT advisor oversees with you the entire application process from sort of the very beginning of, selecting or even discussing what type of degree that you're looking for based on your research interest, based on your practice interest. They then work with you through the entire year, meeting with you regularly to sort of discuss all aspects of the application process. You then have a separate statement of purpose advisor who walks and meets with you over an 8-week period, reviewing resume, statement of purpose, all of the writing components of your application. Next slide, please. Other components include an intensive summer workshop that is actually taught by summer workshop faculty. Maida herself has been a faculty member over a number of years, and we do it from a critical theory framework. And so what we do is we create graduate level programming to introduce scholars to the graduate programs that they will be entering into the following fall, but to give them a way of navigating the landscape of, say, if they're applying to a PWI or they're applying to a program where they may not know the faculty. We also have a recruiters fair. This coming year, all of our programming is virtual, an outlier of the pandemic. But what we realized is by creating a virtual summer workshop and recruiters month is we're able to reach all of our cohort, because what we realize is that many of our scholars need to work in the summer and don't have sort of the capacity to just sort of step away for weeks at a time to be in one place in person. And so we offer all of our programming virtually. That way, again, we're being able to emphasize both equity and access. And so during the Recruiters Month, our scholars are able to meet with up to 40 of our consortium partners and talk with them about their programs of study, about PhD, master's programs, being able to connect with alumni from those programs, talking with what key professors they should be getting in touch with. And we also offer a recruiters fair virtually, where they again can have one-to-one and small group meetings with admissions, personnel, and deans. We also have an incredibly strong alumni network. We have an alumni committee that's made up of about 6 IRT alums, and they continue to organize and set up programs for alumni at all years of their career trajectory, knowing that there's no one year where someone needs more or less support. That in order to sustain and thrive in education, particularly as a scholar of color, whether it's a school leader or a teacher or a faculty member, we need to be uplifting and checking in with each other at all times, at all points of our career. Next slide, please. So the timeline is that you apply to IRT 1 year before you plan to apply to graduate school. This is not just for juniors or seniors in undergrad. We take career changers. If you've been out and again, you're working and decide you want to come back for your master's. Sol actually did our program twice. She did it once as a master's, and then she came back and did it as she was getting ready for her PhD program. So you will apply this cycle for 23-24 application cycle. if they apply, they will be going to graduate school in the fall of 24. If admitted, you'll begin your graduate program in the fall of 25. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the application is now on our website. It opened on December 1, and it will close on March 1st. And notifications will begin in May, and the cohort begins at the end of June. Next slide. And so as you'll see, we just wanted to give you sort of, this is what you'll receive as an IRT scholar. So it begins with the admissions and orientation process. We do pre-application advising that actually starts the beginning of June, with then the Summer Institute happens at the end of June into July. And then you do fall application advising in the fall, and then post-application advising December through April. So again, as you can see, we follow you from the very beginning of the application process to also once you have been accepted into an institution, being able to negotiate financial aid packages, looking at the decision-making process in terms of, you know, which school is the best fit based on a number of criteria, and supporting you through your matriculation decision. Next slide. So the eligibility requirements, you'll see in these sort of 4 squares. Next slide. So as mentioned, you can apply sort of as a college junior or senior, as a recent graduate, as a master's student, and as a working professional. And again, the program starts in early June with pre-advising, and the Summer Institute starts at the end of June. Next slide. So in terms of strong IRT candidates, what do they have? So we're looking for candidates with research experience, for PhD applicants, a commitment to a field of study. And how does that connect to social justice, access, and equity? Strong writing skills, so in terms of thinking about research papers you've written, writing samples, senior theses, final papers. And that trust in the process and being open to feedback, that IRT, that we're very honest with you in terms of setting goals, of being accountable, of keeping to timelines, that doing, you know, 6 to 7 applications at a time can be quite rigorous, and we want to be there to support you. Next slide. So here are some of the fields that our masters and PhDs have applied to. So as you can see, there's quite a range that we're able to support through your IRT Scholar Year. And here's a list of our current consortium. So these are member institutions who you're not limited to applying just to those schools, but that these consortiums will offer fee waivers for the application process, as well as have supported IRT scholars in the past. So application materials, what you'll see online is that there'll be an application form. We request resume, a CV, and transcripts, 3 recommendations, and then there are a few essay questions. So again, both the bit.ly and the QR code would lead you to a brochure that does a summary of this information, as well as lists our website and our contact information. So I want to offer our appreciation to being able to share this information with you. Here is some contact information. So for those of you that would want to contact us directly, again, the website is www.andover.edu/IRT. Both LaShonda and I have listed our emails and then the general IRT email as well. Feel free to follow us on our social media, which is at IRT Andover. So thank you again. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, and we will circle back to them as we after the panel, because the hope is that the panel, as they're speaking, could be answering some of the questions that you already have. But please don't hesitate to offer them in the Q&A now if they're top of mind. So I'd love for our panel to come on screen now. And what we're going to do is start with the first question, which is, in what ways has IRT been influential to your career? And I'll ask who would like to start us off with that. Marcus.
Yeah, I've been kind of thinking about this question as I connect with different IRT alum and thinking about our experiences, Catherine, how they've gone from coming in and being a graduate student in not only in your classroom, but in the program that you built out, and then now working alongside of you in different consulting practices, and as well as working around SEL work for the state of Massachusetts. And my story and how I got introduced to IRT, I didn't even know I wanted to be an educator when I was up to a junior in undergrad, and I went to Morehouse College undergrad. I knew I wanted to study psychology, knew I wanted to work with students, but it wasn't until I started a mentorship program that I realized, working with the high schoolers that I worked with, that I wanted to get involved earlier in the pipeline. And so I wanted to become a teacher. And I was completely lost. I didn't know where to go from there. I didn't have any education classes under my belt. Matter of fact, Morehouse didn't even have an education program. And it was from there that I literally started knocking on doors and asking different professors. And I came across a mentor. His name's Kino Sadler, who had a program to train teachers. And he kind of pointed me in the direction of IRT. And so from there, I was able to take my senior year, take some classes at different institutions in order to get some education experience under my belt, and then apply. And in the application process that he kind of just like you described, I was able to take my previous experiences and be competitive. And that's what ultimately led to me attending BC, and the story starts there and teaching. So RT was foundational in my experience of becoming a teacher.
I'm gonna follow Marcus because I have a personal connection, 1 degree off to him in my IRT and career story. I'll just say that when I first found out about IRT, it was a brochure like similar to this one. And I just went to a recruiters meeting in my undergrad institution because I knew that you had to get a master's to become a teacher in many states. And so I knew I needed a master's in education. So I just went to this thing and thought I would just get some information about just another program that helps. And I ended up meeting Leslie, and it was one-on-one, and we like laughed, and she listened to me. And I just, from the beginning of my interactions with IRT, it was just so personal and relationship based, and there was a real connection. And that really continued on throughout my experience with IRT. I met Catherine at the when she was on the other side. I was an IRT scholar, and Catherine was recruiting IRT students. And the first time we met, we were like holding hands and almost crying by the end of our session because we both really like understood how urgent, important, and like beautiful it is to work with youth. And these kinds of like real personal connections are, I think, a huge part of the IRT experience for me, and they continue. It was through IRT that I did the Donovan program, and through the Donovan connection that I got my first job at Somerville High, through another alum who I think was at your wedding, Marcus. And it's just these like really personal connections that are super meaningful and all really foundationally based on this shared commitment to transformation and to uplifting and transforming together with youth. And so it's just immediate trust, immediate connection, and that's really launched me to be able to thrive and really also supportive graduate school settings that not only help me grow more critically, but also like, take care of me.
Yeah, I in my entire life, I am a daughter of outreach programs. Like I am the person who community has really championed. So when I was in 7th grade, I was recruited for the early academic outreach program, right? And EAOP got me into Berkeley, right? Like helped me figure out how to situate all of my life experiences in a way that a PWI could really see, not because we were any less worthy, but because there was keys, right? There were certain keys that people in higher ed had, and we needed to be packaged a certain way. And so I go to Berkeley, and then I find the Level Playing Field Institute, and they usher me through Berkeley as an ideal scholar. So as I was thinking about grad school, I'm like, well, where is my EAOP of grad school? Like, who's going to teach me how to do that as a first gen student? And somebody told me about IRT, and there was a poster in the Student Learning Center where we saw all of our advising. And to me, it was just like, okay, well, this program's going to help me get into grad school, packaging myself one more time. And I remember thinking, well, now I don't come from the underperforming school district. Now I have, a 3.7 from Berkeley, right? So maybe I won't need as much help, but no, I needed the help. I needed the fee waivers. I needed to understand the consortium, where bilingual ed was going to be somewhere where I could go learn from. And as a Californian, I just didn't really see, you go to UCs are amazing. And if you want to go to private, you go to Stanford or you go to USC, right? Like there's no need to leave California. And IRT was the first time that said, no, like let's apply to Brown, let's apply to the East Coast, and let's apply to Boston College. And I was in the summer intensive. And I think it was the first time, one, I made lifelong friends. Priscilla, who is now Dr. Leva and a professor who just got tenured at Loyola Marymount, was my best friend at the IRT. And I think it really helped me solidify myself as just in my scholarly identity. I would say that at the intensive, it was the expectations that were held for me at the intensive was higher than Cal had ever even held for me. And it allowed me to really transform my work into scholarly like identity, to go into the classroom knowing that I understood like foundational theory and like critical race theory and educational pedagogy, so that when I was being taught like really sticky things about the classroom, like data-driven instruction and flexible grouping and understanding why the subskill of a standard was so important, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm receiving PD to have a good lesson. It was because I understand the systems that are at play that don't allow students like mine to get quality work or to get standards-based work or on-grade level work. So I felt that it put me into the teaching profession in a way that was completely centered in equity and racial justice.
And can I quickly add, I think something that, I'm getting from all of us is the level of care, right, that IRT pours into us. I remember, I was also a summer intern. I remember that we had to lead discussion over some theoretical text that I had never, ever like been introduced to before. I didn't know who Jacques Derrida was. I didn't know who these different folks were. And then being asked to lead a discussion in front of my peers as if I knew what I was talking about was really terrifying. But to have people here, to have people at RT that walk with you every step of the way, right, who encourage you, who tell you how to lesson plan. And lesson planning now is incredibly vital to what I'm doing, right? Incredibly vital to how I'm able to engage with students, the or flexibility that you have to have in front of a classroom. All that I learned from IRT, and I think it was at IRT where I know it was at IRT where I began to see myself as a scholar, right? Where I could see myself as actually being able to attain a PhD. Shout out to my Morehouse brother. I went to Spelman, and seeing the professors, I was like, oh, I think that'd be cool. I don't know about this PhD thing, but I think teaching wouldn't be difficult. I think it'd be pretty easy. And IRT really, I think, introduced me to the reality of teaching, right, and the important role and instructional role that educators can have in front of the classroom. And I think it allowed me to see myself reflected in theory, right? It allowed me to see myself reflected in the classroom, but it also gave me language, it gave me steps, it gave me strategies to become the teacher, to become the future professor, the future scholar that I saw myself possibly becoming.
Thank you all. And, this leads me into asking you the next question, which is, as all of you sort of both found community, but also, India, what you just said, right? Like also found ways with which not only were you challenged, but you were challenged with support. Is that, given the times that we're in right now, how do you trouble traditional ways of knowing in your research, instructional practice, and or your leadership roles?
I can kick us off for this one. I think that when I became a principal of a public school in Washington, D.C., when I was 26 years old. And just to give context, right? And now I'm like, was that even developmentally appropriate for me? but I did it, and I did it with community, and I did it understanding that I did not have to be the most knowledgeable person in the room. I needed to lean into community expertise. I needed to build teams around me that made sense for what the school needed. And I was very aware of being Latina, first gen, young, and a principal, where I was the principal, and I was the youngest person in my school building. But what did give me a lot of solace, and when I felt moments of unpreparedness or moments of insecurity, was that I was the result, right? I was the dual language kid. I was the dual language participant. I was able to leave that school in Espanol and English because I did have the opportunity to go to dual language schools myself. And I think that's what led me to just a career of respecting and understanding my own story, that I am the research. My friends and I are the research, right? Our lived reality is theory to flesh. And I think as I've advanced in my career, I've been able to really think about, okay, so what is my experience teaching me while still being scholarly in the work, and reading what I need to read, and talking and having conversations with those who push my thinking. But what is it that I am lived research for? And I think that's where I'm at now. It's like, how do where I founded a group with my sisters who are also lifelong educators, and we are creating what I needed as a dual language principal. And we are creating a framework that centers the Latino principal in dual language space, because we know that challenging traditional ways of monolingualism in this country and in our public schools is not okay, right? So figuring out, how do we even heal ourselves, accept our own selves as the research, to be able to lead in spaces that are authentic to us, but that we can do it in a way that really honors our communities and the children and the multilingual learners that we have. And I think that that's what I'm dedicating my life's work now, is just how do we challenge traditional monolingual ways of thinking, and even as gritty as, like, I'm not someone's ELL. Like, I am not your English language learner. Like, I am a bilingual student. Like, don't put that label on me. Like, I'm still learning Spanish just as much as I'm learning English when I'm headed into kindergarten. We're all learning language. And just challenging narrow definitions of what student success and reclassification looks like for what the government has deemed English language learners, and will continue to push and make space for other bilingual Latino principals to come in and feel brave and able to and prepared to lead communities in ways that we know the traditional system is just not, like, we don't fit in any school district. We are like these little islands in districts across the country. So I feel like I'm up against the grain at all times in my work, but I know that we need each other to serve kids better.
Add on to that, because I love what you are saying about our bodies being the research, right? Our everyday, ordinary lives being the material through which we come into knowledge, right? The material through which we understand not only each other, but our worlds, and how important our own contribution and our bodies' contribution to spaces are. Because I'm not in the K through 12 system. I'm in the university system, but in my research is about I study Black Texan themes. I'm interested in the Black South. I'm interested in gender and sexual expression that's happening in the Black South, and how the senses, the bodily senses, right, touch, taste, smell, feel, how these things become these things that we consider to be natural, right, to our everyday living experiences, are also means through which we come to understand our world, right? Our means through which we create knowledge about ourselves, our culture, our genders, our sexualities, race, so on and so forth. So my work is really interested in how, I look to Black Texan women and femmes as understanding that there's a particular awareness around our oppression, around our identities that continue to sort of invade who we are, right? The things that society may be telling us, the things that legislation likes to tell us, right? The things that oppression and the state like to tell us, but how, Black Texan women and femmes not only use this awareness of how we're constantly being violated by things that are not in and of ourselves, but how their bodily senses create understandings of their social conditions. One of the things I appreciate about being in sociology is that there's this long held acknowledgement that power and oppression and structure become an intimate part of who we are, an intimate part of our bodies, and how we see ourselves and operate. But I'm really interested in, like, what does it look like, when we think about Black cultural production, when we think about music, when we think about literature, when we think about performance. So for example, one of the things I'm looking at right now for my dissertation, or this final project for my PhD, is I look to the role of moans, right? I look to how do blues women like Victoria Spivey use moans to articulate being lost in this legacy of blues music, right? Across the South, across the North. And how can I compare those moans to someone like Megan Thee Stallion, right? Someone who we've seen come into stardom and fame, but we've also seen her experience really tragic violence, right? Violence that still remains with her, right? I think in an interview, she talked about still having bullet fragments in her feet, how she's lost some feeling in some of her feet because of the damaged nerves. And how do we look to, what do we think about her music post that violence, right? What kind of moans are being iterated through Megan Thee Stallion at that point? And how can we think and look to something like Open Mouths, like a moan that's being carried across the 20th and 21st century, to think about Black women and femmes' vocality, right? What is it about their voice, right? What is it about the sound that's being uttered that tells us more about how Black women and femmes are living their lives, right? how we can, so a lot of my research is interested in how we can look to these very, maybe popular, but very, everyday things that we engage in, that open the door to how we can think differently about the contributions we're making to society, to the world, to knowledge production, to the academy. And these things that are seen as disrespectful, these things that are seen as inappropriate can actually be formative lenses through which we can see ourselves as beautiful, can see ourselves as creating knowledge. And I'll end there.
Yeah, that was incredibly powerful. And as I'm sitting and kind of thinking about my response, I just completely let it go because of just listening um, to the foundational work that's being done by two different IRT spaces and alums. And I think that's one of the powerful things about going through a program like this is that it allows you to tap into um, not only that network, but that real space that exists in this world, right? And I'm not sociology focused necessarily. I'm very STEM minded, but everything that was kind of brought up in this space. I'm also not Latino, and so everything that was brought up in this space, so deeply resonates with me because we're vibrating on the same frequency for sure. Um, I think in terms of thinking of ways of troubling the different ways of knowing. I love the we are the result, we are the research, and the importance of our bodies in this space. I am so I'm the first male to graduate from college in my family, and it wasn't even until grad school that I understood the notions of cultural and social capital. Um, and I think going through this program and not only the IRT program, but going to Boston College and being part of the Donovan program, I'm able to actually start to reap the benefits of being able to tap in to certain spaces and places of different capitals. And in learning about social capital, learning about cultural capital, um, it is oftentimes framed with, it's oftentimes tied into and framed around power and how places and people who are currently in power are able to maintain those structures because they have access to these forms of capital. But what I love and what I'm seeing even right now on this panel is we are shifting those power dynamics. And so when you hear these different stories about the research that's being done and the leadership that is in existence, we are able to then change the narrative and take control. And in the little piece of the overall puzzle that I've found myself in currently is working within a larger school district and being able to kind of shape decisions around what curriculum looks like for across the district, taking extremely seriously the idea that we're behind the times with computer science education across the board. So whether we're talking about the way that it intersects all the different aspects of our identity, we're not even doing what we need to do flat out with preparing students at a baseline. And so being able to kind of take that seriously and think about the identities of our students. What does it mean for students who haven't traditionally seen themselves in the STEM field? What does it mean in terms of our curriculum selection and standards that we put forth, and what our expectations of teachers and administrations in order to help serve those students, and and the one of the baseline ways of that our team is really doing that is looking at things like the engineering design process. And so how do we take the engineering design process, and instead of giving them a cookie cutter, oh, well, here's a solution to climate change that you need to come up with, asking them to really come up with from the first step, look at their own communities, looking at their own interests, looking at their own cultures, and seeing what problems do they authentically want to solve, and then helping to make sure that we provide the skills and rigorous curriculum around how to actually go about researching and solving that problem. And at the same time, putting pressure on a lot of the different companies and communities that have already developed resources, and saying, come on, guys, it's not enough. You really need to think about what you're doing, Lego. You really need to think about what you're doing with these different curriculum providers to actually really have our kids in mind. And so yeah, I'm inspired by what I'm hearing, what we're building in the panel, and I'm just, you know, taking it back to my space as well.
Going last is fascinating. I'm trying to weave in everything that I've learned, and it's just really, really lovely. I will say that um one thing that all three of you guys touched on that I want to add some more color on is the idea of making change, making impact, feeling brave, like Maida said, getting in that room and making in that room in the central district office and making change. And I will say, I'll just start with a little anecdote. Before this meeting, I was just at a meeting at my new job. I'm the state director for migrant education for the state of Maine, and I have just started the job. And I, at my first meeting with my team, we were setting group norms, and it's a team that I've just joined, so I thought I should maybe take a step back. And I listened to them talk about, you know, safe space and psychological safety. And I thought, well, no, I have some stuff I want to add to this because this is the Department of Education we're talking about. Like they, you know, this, it matters how we do. So I added, we need to be centering children and their grown-ups in our conversations in these work meetings. And we need to be constantly interrogating the power structure that we're in and making sure that the structural changes that we're making, thinking about how they impact the children and grown-ups that are in the state of Maine, getting educated in the state of Maine. And so these are just, I just did that, and people were super glad for it, very grateful, super down for it, but they weren't necessarily perspectives that were getting brought up inherently by people. And so I just think like the confidence, the bravery, and just the normalization of speaking up and speaking out, and I think that is something that definitely happened not only through IRT's like material perks, or and not only through like the curriculum of graduate education, but actually through the cohort and the community, and the values and the relationships that were formed through IRT and through the graduate programs that we selected because of the influence of IRT. And so it's like the relationships that we didn't just like pop out of undergrad ready to lead. I definitely did not. And it was through these like very, very long-term nurturing relationships in community with other people who were vibrating on the same frequency, like Marcus said. It was through these you know, 10 years of cohort and community work over and over again that made me realize like, hey, I care about this. I have things to say. I know I can say it. And I'm saying it, you know, with a culture, trying to build a culture of like collaboration and teamwork that really like matters. And so I wanted to add that, um, that, um, that all the impact and growth and power that we get from IRT happens. It doesn't come just innately from us. We all have, you know, impact and growth and power, but it gets nurtured and brought out into the public through the community that's formed. And I think that IRT definitely has a value on making sure you're finding a department, a school that will nurture you and see you instead of just getting you the right curriculum or whatever. And so I want to emphasize that.
Thank you all. And, you know, as all of you that are watching, you can see the depth of impact that even bringing 4 alumni together, the way that they're even networking as we speak with each other. And the idea is that, again, going through graduate school should not be a secret hush process, that going through a career as a scholar, instructional leader of color should not be an isolate process. And one of the things that continues to draw me back to IRT is its sense of community, but community in the sense that it also is about change, it's about risk, it's about courage. And so as, again, in light of all that's happening in our world right now, the last question that I sort of want to pose to you all is, given the continuing urgency and crisis of our times, why do we need more teachers, school leaders, and professors now that are truly reflective of who we are, what we stand for, and who we stand with?
I'm gonna start first here because I just had this whole process again. If as someone in education and with one foot in education, one foot in academia, I have a constant existential process of like, what the purpose of all this. It just happened recently this week. I was reading a news article about, so it's gonna get dark, but I'm gonna just honor about a child who was had migrated from Guatemala, was working in a poultry processing plant, working the night shift, going to middle school in the day, working the night shift, cleaning the poultry processing plant by night, got sucked into one of the cleaning machines and died. And it really stopped. I was gonna write all day, but I wrote some poetry, and I wrote a bunch of people that I know, because I was just like, what is the point? Life is really dark, and like people are just dying anyway. So what am I going to do? And so I just want to recognize that if you're that as you continue living in this dark world, that's controlled by dark systems with dark histories, the darkness is definitely a part. But I kept reading, and so I read this other article about bilingual youth who cross the border every day, and their literacies that they form by crossing the border every day with their families. And I wrote some implications for classroom teachers, and I realized, like, oh well, they go to school, and like they could have a good day at school or a terrible day at school. And like you can have, as I happened, I didn't have a calling to go into meat processing plant policy. I didn't have a calling to go into anything other than working with youth and education. And so kind of reading these articles again, reading and reading, brought me into darkness, but also brought me out, because I realized, like, if I realized that, very simply put, kids could have a good day at school and a bad day at school. And that's kind of like my perspective when I was a classroom teacher. And it's really about where finding out where your calling is. We need more of everyone to undo these systems. And if you guys are here because you found that your calling is for working with youth, or something to do in schools, or something to do with research, or pursuing knowledge that you embody, that counters dominant narratives that prop up these dark systems, like if you found a calling towards that, and that's what brought you here, I would say follow that calling. What is my takeaway here? I had this written out. Why do we need more teachers? Yeah, sometimes I like refrain from encouraging it because it's so dark, but right now I'm in a more hopeful stint that life is dark no matter where you're at. And if you're here because you have an interest or a calling towards education, knowledge, or research, that's critical, or that's based on your experiences, as a person of color, as a first-gen student, as a low-income student, as an immigrant student, like if you want to get out there and work in education, then even though it's dark, you gotta do it because it's dark, I think. Sorry.
And so no, it's like totally your truth. And I also read about that young boy. And another thing that a lot of Central American kids are doing right now is roofing. And in one of my fellowships that I was a part of, one question that I was taught to ask was, when you see a problem and you want to help alleviate whatever harm that problem is doing, you have to ask yourself, who is benefiting from that? Right? So anytime, that's just an offering that I was taught that helps me. It's like, oh, okay, construction companies are benefiting from that, and so and urban development is benefiting from that. And it's just a different way to think about the darkness in the systems, to figure out how to work your way backward as an educator. But I think I'm going to keep my answer a little bit different. I think it's because it's joyful. I think education is so joyful. I think children and youth and young people are really joyful and can add a tremendous amount of celebration and depth to your world and to your life. So that's one. And then I think the other one is just the research is clear. When we are in the classroom, when we are teaching children who look like us, our students do better, period. Like, it's in the research. When a Black male is teaching a Black boy, his reading scores are better. When Latino children are in schools that are linguistically liberating, they come out bilingual, right? So the research is clear. We are needed. It is joyful. You can make a living and a career off of it in different ways. And I also think the educator, anybody who was a former teacher, the skill set that you have after you've been an educator, the skill set that you have after you've been a public school principal, right? Like it's just gives tenfold to any other passion that comes in your life, because we're all multidimensional and we're not only just educators. So I think it's a wonderful skill set. I think it's a lot of joy, and we are effective when we are teaching our own.
Yeah, I mean, echoing exactly what was kind of said, is there are systems that are in place. I mean, this is teaching in a lot of ways is a calling, especially in America, right? It's not a profession that is highly regarded and as respected as it should be. I mean, you can kind of ask anybody, whether they're sitting at a bar or riding in an Uber. When I tell them I'm a teacher, there's this clear love and respect. But we know a lot of the challenges that teachers face, and some of the attacks around CRT and things of that nature. And so it's not easy. It's not easy, but there is a real joy, and I think the importance of having teachers, professors, school leaders out there is in the profession, is to really think about how to cultivate and allow for the next generation to be their authentic selves and to find their identities. And we all have different things that have happened in our lives that can help create the foundation and kind of create the soil for students to grow. And it's already been said very clearly on this panel, very eloquently, around if you find you have a passion to get into the space, then please, even if you don't go the IRT route, right? Please, we need you in this space to help the next generation. From a kind of my existential crisis that I go through now is around identity and where we as a labor force and a workforce are going to be with the advent of things like artificial intelligence. We have to break free of attaching so much of our life to labor. And there are systems that are being created that are being not created but replicated in the technical space that are having some of the exact same issues that we're dealing with now in other space and other systems. So the world is changing very quickly, and it is imperative that we have teachers who can tap in and connect to the cultures and identities of students moving forward. So that's what I would say with why we need people who are serious about the profession to jump in.
I'll quickly add, I'm reminded of a quote by Saidiya Hartman that she talks about, or she says that so much of oppression is policing the imagination. And one of the things that I found important and helpful for me as a student, as a PhD candidate, I'm always reminded of the educators who pushed my imagination. I'm always reminded of the educators who kept asking me open-ended questions, right, about the possibilities of the world, the possibilities that I could contribute to traditional canons, right, to traditional curriculum, that the knowledge that we say we're supposed to have, right, but then the knowledge that we live that contradicts the knowledge that we're supposed to have, right. And I really believe that we're in a time where control over information is a way to control people, right? By restricting the types of intellectual imagination, freedom that we have access to, right? That they assume, or systems assume, that they can create model citizens, right? Model subjects. But I think, the role of educators is an incredibly revolutionary one, right? Definitely not the only revolution we need, but educators play a very vital role in this revolution, and that they assist in cultivating skills and that help us understand things, that help us delineate information, that help us with best practices, and how to inform our outlooks, right? How to shape our outlooks of the world. And I think educators offer a range of ideas and possibilities that sometimes our cultural bubbles and algorithms don't grant us and aren't allowing us, especially these days. So I think, you know, the role of the educator in this time is to garner imagination. I mean, I think imagination is going to push us through and lead to the freedom of all of us.
Thank you all. As we sort of close out this portion, I wanted to invite the panel. Is there any particular follow-up question that you would like to pose to each other?
This may be a little off topic, but you know, in the space of joy, and uplifting, what are y'all listening on your Apple Music, Spotify? I used to say, what CD would you throw in the deck, but you know, that's not a thing anymore. So what music are y'all listening to?
Nas. I'm very late to the game on Nas. If you haven't listened to Nas recently, I recommend you to put him back on. I just love, like, specifically If I Ruled the World. I've been really thinking a lot about subjunctive, like about how the joy and the darkness live together. And so, and like part of the way to overcome, it's kind of like what India was saying about possibilities and futures. Like within this darkness, you like sit in the void, and like the subjunctive, like the hoped for, the hypothesized, the possible, like all of that becomes just as real. Like the possibilities and the dreams and hopes we have for the future become just as real. And I've been thinking about this in like a theoretical way, and reading a lot of Afrofuturism, speculative fiction and stuff. And then I listened to If I Ruled the World, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. Subjunctive beauty. And so that's what I've been listening to a lot. Past, present, like who cares? It's all for the future.
So my music is like chaotic. It just doesn't even make sense. Sometimes people are like, how do you even know this song? I'm like, I don't know. It's all over the place. But my pure love of music right now is tiny desk concerts. I love them. They are filmed about 10 minutes from my house, and I am on a secret mission to be invited to one. I have not found the gatekeeper yet, but I have found the photographer. So I feel like I'm close. I love all tiny desk.
So my music taste is also a little chaotic, but to be honest, I'm still in my Renaissance era. That woman's album still has a hold on me. So will I still listen to Renaissance? Yes. Because I think there is something really powerful about the joy that it cultivates. Even, and I'm really waiting for this live album too. And then it's going to be a new era of just straight Beyonce. But of course, I'm really loving, you know, I can't just say that I research and study Megan Thee Stallion, but I do listen to her music. So of course, Megan, and I really love Cleo Soul right now as well. Just the positive vibes, the real chill alternative R&B vibes are really, really necessary for finishing up this dissertation. So,
Thank you. We do have an audience question. So I just wanted to, I put it in the chat, but Anthony is asking, I'm wondering how we get past the ideas founded in white supremacy, such as educational and curriculum can only exist in the way put forth by these same systems. Do all of our teaching have to be in the traditional credential instructor. I'm an educator, but often I'm looked at as not official because I don't choose the credential, but have more education than most teachers with credentials.
I have an interesting response to this because I believe that, like, as a whole human, you learn from all different types of fuentes, right? Different funds of knowledge and different sources. And in Spanish, the cognate to educated is educado. But educado has nothing to do with credentials or degrees. Educado in Spanish has like a colloquialism of reference to just treating people well, have like walking with dignity, regardless of like where you find yourself, and being in community with others. So my very notion as a Latina bilingual person is like this juxtaposition of what this cognate that sounds like, looks like, in two languages can mean very different things. So to that audience member, I would say, like, absolutely not, right? Our children learn from all their grownups, like Sol says. And grownups are elders, grownups are community activists, grownups are their caretakers, grownups are the front office and their bus driver, right? And like what it all means to come together for the whole child.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think from when I kind of read this question, I think about all the different hoops that that I've had to jump through in order to become a certified teacher, in order to maintain licensing and move on to the next level or whatnot. And that's a reality. And the different tests, all those different things are realities. It is a part of the game to play. But I also think about how a lot of that didn't prepare for the actual connections that I made with students, and how a lot of that work, you know, the actual real work as it's being done, it can't be tested on the MTELs in order to become a teacher. So there is a reality to being a professional, getting a part of it, being a part of a union, and having all the benefits and what you have to do. But the real work kind of sits outside of that space. And the other piece, as we're thinking about work in this, education is changing very quickly, and the world around us is changing very quickly. And so the ways that people are becoming educated sit outside of the traditional education system. So if you find yourself in a space where the system doesn't necessarily work for everybody, especially the public school system, and there are other things outside of public school systems too, but even if you don't find yourself in that space, man, the education space online and being able to connect with people is a real thing too. So don't necessarily limit yourself in that.
Thank you. So another question that I'll start off with, it says, how does IRT teach participants to protect themselves emotionally and find joy in the academy or schools? You know, I think that the way that it's less about how we teach than how we come into community. And the fact that for the Summer Institute, the summer faculty are themselves IRT alums. And they were asked this summer to create courses based on what they felt IRT scholars needed in these current times. So, for example, I didn't hand them a ready-made curriculum and said, you know, here are the lesson plans, you're the teacher, this is what I need you to do. That I shifted it and said, I want you to co-create this with me. That we extended invitations to more faculty than we've had in a number of years. And what we also did is, because we were going virtual again, is I asked the faculty to teach at time zones that would reflect the times where our scholars were. So if you were on the East Coast, there were faculty that offered to teach at 8, 9 o'clock at night, so that we were teaching at the end of the day, so that all of the scholars who were working, which again were most of our scholars, could then come into Institute classes without feeling that they were missing a session or coming late. That what we did was we made sure we had instructors in 3 different time zones, no matter where sort of you lived, but that we were running them as small facilitation groups. And so this idea of being able, the issue of protecting yourself is really about caring for yourself and doing it in a way where you are being seen, that you're not being invisibilized, that we talk about the reality of what does it mean to live in contradiction, that I often will say as an Asian American Hawaiian woman, that I can be both visible and hyper visible and invisible at the same time. And how do I live with that reality in a way that continues to allow me to be an educator, to be someone who continues to be a change maker and take risks? I see that LaShonda has put her hand up. Please come on screen.
Thanks. I just wanted to also add, because I think this was a question that I had to IRT myself when I first joined. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that, as Sol talked about, sometimes education is not a very happy industry. And I also think a lot of times that's designed. And so I think the first part is to actually be honest. The previous question made me think about Professor David Labrie out of Stanford. And I think the first thing that we have to do is to be honest and be realistic about the state of affairs in American education. I think for some of our students, that is a starting point to say that the experiences that you had are real, that they hurt, and that they could also sometimes be reflected in the way that we talk about theory or curriculum or practice. My first workshop, students protested us, and they could find joy from that. Like, I'm not going to take that as something that was wrong. And so I think that that's also important, is that part of that protection means that you have to allow students to show you that there are times where they do not agree with you. And you cultivating that community as an adult and as an educator, to me, is part of the process of teaching other educators how to have joy, how to protect themselves in these systems, and how to really be accountable for communities. I think the other thing is something that Professor Labrie says that I find to be true, that we demonstrate, especially in the advising process, is allowing our students and ourselves to be wrong. There are times where a student might come in and they say, LaShonda, I want to be a professor in this field, and I'm really interested in political science and philosophy, and ya to the third. And as we get to know them, it is sociology, it is African American studies, it might be something completely different. And so part of it means that I think for educators, and often people who occupy identities like us, we have to allow ourselves the space to be wrong, to challenge ourselves in what we think that we might know. And that applies to the institutions, that applies to what we may know personally, but actually giving ourselves that grace to say, you know what, I don't know. And I think, to me, that is one of the first steps of being able to enter sometimes into an academy that expects you to say, you know, and then often you feel that pressure to sort of perform to a society or to a group of people who aren't really aligned to who you are. And so I would just say that I really appreciate that question, because I think right now, for so many people, and I speak for myself as a Black queer woman, seeing a livelihood in some of these institutions can be difficult. But I think often by being realistic about the situation and then working from there to find community, to find those challenging spaces, I think that as an organization, we've worked to some degree to try to mitigate those harms by being in a constant state of reflection. And so that was all I wanted to sort of add into that, because I've seen it from the programmatic standpoint, but I think it's important for us to never assume that we know that there all is what there is to know about everything. So.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? As audience members, what we'd love to do is for you to reflect on everything that you've heard and to share either something you appreciated about your time on this webinar, something that you're still thinking about, something that you're reminded of, or something that challenged you today. What do you wish you knew when you applied to graduate school?
There are many things, but I think the biggest thing I wish I knew when I applied to grad school was that learning and gathering knowledge and producing knowledge is a lifelong endeavor, that learning never stops. And I think this echoes a lot of what a few of the comments that Reed said. As educators, right, it's not that we're just sitting up here and we're experts, but that we're learning, the students are learning just as much from us than that we are learning from them, right? And for me, going to grad school, the idea of a PhD is that you're going into grad school to become this expert of knowledge, and like that's it, right? You go into grad school, there's a certain amount of information that you need to know, that you're supposed to know, and then that's it. And it was actually IRT that introduced me to the hidden curriculum, right? The things that they don't tell you about teaching, about these foundational people that you're supposed to know before you even get into the classroom. But even as I continued my degree, I found so many things that changed my thinking, that challenged my thinking, that still continue to challenge my thinking. So, you know, I'm not just here to get a degree, but I'm here to learn how to become a lifelong learner. For me, it looks like a PhD. But I mean, it's a freeing concept, right? That my learning doesn't stop, but that it continues.
I would say knowing that you are the prize, essentially. There's a lot of big name institutions that are out there that have a deep history, but your willingness to come forward and do the work, and be in this profession, like that is, you are the reason these institutions exist. And so interview the institutions like that. And know that if an institution, regardless of the name, is not giving you foundationally what you need, and they don't align with you, it's okay to turn down an offer. So I would say you are the prize.
You actually have a story about that, Marcus.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to give people the chance to share. Yes.
You know, initially I was going to say you should know more about the city that you're going to go to grad school in. But I was young. I mean, I went straight from undergrad to moving to Boston 3 weeks after I graduated. And when I got there, I was like, wait, how north am I? Like I was like, I thought I was like next to New York or something. But then I also think that like the risk taking, like almost the not knowing of it is what led me to like never even come back to California, right? So I think know that if you are like me, not a career changer, not going back as older, and also that I went to undergrad like 20 minutes from my home. So like if you are a younger candidate, know that like you don't know all of you yet, and like you don't know who you're gonna be on a different coast or in a different state, or like the exposure to like different weather and terrain and people and culture is good. And that grad school is only temporary and you can always move after that. So I think that's one thing that that I would wish I knew, but kind of I'm happy I didn't. It worked out well in my favor, but also that one thing that I'm glad IRT taught me in the process was sometimes packages come with deals, especially connected to where you teach. So when I got into Brown, and that package was good, but I had to be teaching in Rhode Island for 3 years after. And maybe that's really appealing to some. It wasn't to me. UCLA was connected to teaching in LAUSD. I didn't want to do that, right? So what I appreciated about Boston and Boston College was that I had a lot of loan forgiveness through the university, not a third party. And I just had to teach in Title I schools, but it could be anywhere in the nation. And that really was freeing to me because while I was willing to move across the country, I wasn't willing to move across the country and commit another 3 years. I didn't even know how my being was going to feel in that space. So be really into the details and ask all the questions around where the loan forgiveness comes from, whether it's third party, whether it's directly through the institution. because loan forgiveness and loan repayment is real, especially for Black and brown people.
I agree wholeheartedly with what Maida said about taking that risk and moving. And in order to do that, you have to really also know about what Marcus said about finding the place that wants you and values you and will take care of you. Both of those things have to go together, because I can think of multiple institutions in Boston that if it weren't for that Donovan program, that would have, you know, chewed you up and spat you out and turned you into a little shining turd on their brochure in the process. And so I think it's like has to be stated over and over and over again, like the prestigious name places, you have to really investigate and make sure that you get the right feeling. Like I said, I almost cried when I met Catherine for the first time. My advisor and I here at Michigan State also have cried together. And I mean, it's just like I am someone who really goes based off vibes and the amount of growth and thriving that I've been able to have in my career has been because I have always prioritized finding the places where I felt like a trust and connection. And so I 1,000% really want to stress that. And also what Maida said about the money, which I think there's two things. I think a personal side quest I have is try to redistribute as much money I have as possible from institutions to people's pockets. So you should always like ask for the money because they have it and never feel bad. They have so much, and it's built on like death and darkness. And so there's that, like they are not entitled to that money. And they're gonna use you when you get there to grad school. So you gotta ask for it. And I think also on that note, I wish I had known, especially for the young people there, the really talented, brilliant undergraduates. I agree with what Maida and Marcus have said about you can make a career for this. Check out teacher salaries if you want to be a teacher in these major cities. You can make a very thriving career from this. You can. And as a professor, I'm looking forward to entering the assistant professor faculty grind, because I also know that it will give me flexibility and economic stability 7 years in the future. But you should know, for the young people like me who never thought about salary and income, because a $10,000 stipend was more money than I ever had before. When you enter the PhD, you are committing to 5 years of like chronic underpayment and financial instability. And if your brain is smart enough to get into a PhD, you should really think about the finances of what you're able to do and how you want to navigate your future and your calling. I personally think it's worth it. It took me a while, and I was shocked by the length of the PhD process and its lack of a solid salary. And I think for young people who are choosing to go into graduate school, you have to talk about that, because I was blindsided. I do think it's worthwhile in the end, and I wouldn't choose something else because of the flexibility and the ability to follow my own passions and make my own projects. But I think anytime anyone now asks me about graduate school, I really mention I'm making $20,000 a year for 5 years. You just got to know, and you got to plan for it. And yeah,
That's real. Thank you so much.
but IRT will help you with the application fees, and I wouldn't change my decision actually.
And
Good.
Leslie on the call is a beast at negotiations and matriculations. And so do know that that is a part of our application process. We do look at your offers as well.
I was like coached on how to negotiate. Like IRT was on the call with me. We practiced. I think it might have been with you, Leslie. And then Leslie was like, and then you're going to ask about health insurance. And I'm like, right. I didn't even think that I needed that when I got there. And then you have the call and you feel better about what you're saying.
Yes. So what are those 5 pots of money? Full funding, full tuition and fees, healthcare, a stipend to live on, summer research funding, and conference funding. And then
Yes.
sometimes there's also funding around moving, and also around technology if you're needing a new computer. And you have to ask. It's a difficult ask, of course. Money's always, a difficult issue to deal with. But if you don't ask, then you won't know what else you could have gotten out of the deal.
I
Thank you,
got all
Leslie.
of those pots, and Leslie helped me.
So you're seeing IRT in complete action, because part of it is, again, this is not a process with which you need to do alone. And it is, as you've all heard, incredibly important for us to step into these roles. And what was so important about forming this panel is I wanted to bring together IRT alums who walk different paths from IRT. That, not everyone goes into the professorship, but we need you in the professorship. Not everyone goes into the principalship. Not everyone goes into a K-12 classroom, but we need you from K-12 all the way through the professoriate and as deans, as presidents. And we have IRT alums in all of these positions. And that to me is, and so when you talk about the darkness that we live in, but that's what gives me the light and the hope, is that we are continuing to thrive in our fields because we are leaning into each other. And, so I vividly remember our conversation, standing up in the IRT gymnasium and, really getting into what does it mean to be an Asian American and be an educator and be moving through the ranks of education, not just sort of staying in one position. And, India, I remember the panel that we were just, we were on last spring, and the interactions that we talked about in terms of the way that we need to continue to trouble the ways that we do research, the way knowledge, the way that we do push back at white supremacy. And, Maida stepped in and said, when we started our IIT exploration process in terms of growing, how can we grow to be better? What does the future of IIT look like? And her consulting firm worked directly with LaShonda and I and the staff at IIT. And so the ways that we continue and give back, and as Marcus said, he and I are co-writing curriculum with two other colleagues in Boston. We've been talking about, SEL, social emotional learning. What does that mean in terms of intersecting it with equity and justice? And so instead of talking about it, we're actually writing curriculum, and we're on our 8th cohort across the state offering it. So the ways with which that IoT has different lives to it, but it's all in support of uplift, of care, and it isn't without pushing back. It isn't about not having difficult conversations. It's about stepping in it together. And so as we come to our close, I want to thank all of you who came to our webinar today. We look forward to hearing from you and learning and wanting to learn more information. I want to give an incredible shout out to the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions. They're incredible. Mary Beth and Giselle, you were just incredible to work with. You've been a long time IRT partner. We look forward to growing our relationship with you, particularly as we grow IRT. We've been given the go-ahead. If LaShonda wants to sum that up real quick, but we've been given the go-ahead to continue our growth. In Hawaii, we say mahalo nui loa, which is thank you very much. And we actually never say goodbye. We say a hui ho, which is until we meet again. LaShonda, do you want to do a sign off?
No, I think you've said it all. And in the spirit of our recent holiday, I just thank you all for learning more about the IRT and our path towards becoming a beloved community. That's what I really hear in so much of these comments, is real commitment towards uplifting our world together and not shying away from things that are difficult, but doing so through earnesty and decency. So thank you all for being here, for continuing to challenge what we know to be true. And I think for ultimately fighting for a better world for all of our young people. That is what we're here to do. And the urgency requires us to do it with care. So thank you so much.
And again, India, Maida, Sol, Marcus, Leslie, thank you so much for being illustrious alums and sharing your wisdom and insight with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to IRT for all y'all do.